So Dr. Amy McPherson is a senior scientist at Bloorview Research Institute and an associate professor at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on addressing health inequities experienced by youth with disabilities, particularly in under-discussed areas such as mental health, sexuality, eating disorders, and body image. She works in close partnership with youth, families, clinicians, educators, and disability organizations to ensure her research has real-world impact. Amy is also a registered psychotherapist, supporting adults, particularly those navigating caregiving, identity, and emotional well-being. Her work, both academic and clinical, is grounded in a commitment to inclusion, collaboration, and compassionate care. And today, Amy is going to talk about navigating sexuality with spina bifida and some resources that she's co-created actually, with youth, families, and care teams. Welcome, Amy.
Well, thank you for inviting me today. I always love talking to the AGM. Been here a few times, so thanks for bringing me back again. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about some resources that we've been co-creating with youth with disabilities. But my true love lays in the spina bifida community, which is where I first started doing research 16 years ago when I moved to Canada. So just a quick note about language. So if I say spina bifida, I do mean spina bifida and hydrocephalus. So if I say SBH, hopefully people know what I mean. You'll probably also hear me say both disabled youth and youth with disabilities, sort of interchangeably. We know some people prefer that identity first language, the disabled youth, and some people prefer person first language, so people with disabilities. So I tend to change between the two because there's no consensus. Okay, so I'm just going to talk to you about Wes. And Wes has been telling us that, so he's a they are a power user. And because of that, they didn't take part in gym in their high school. And that's generally where they did sex education, which is probably familiar to a lot of you. And so, they said, well, then I basically didn't get any because I just wasn't included. And then Makumbu also talked about navigating adolescence. Makumbu she happened to have cerebral palsy with some mobility issues. And she's saying they were questioning their sexuality, but they had no one to go to because no one was talking about sexuality with them. So I want to really ground this in kind of the youth voice, and this is why we do the research, not because we came up with a clever idea sitting in our office one day, although that's also fine, but this is really the youth telling us what they want. So when I talk about sexuality, just to get us all on the same page, the World Health Organization talks about sexuality as an integral part of everyone's personality. It's a basic need, and it's a human right. It can't be separated from other aspects of life. It influences thoughts, feelings, actions, interactions, and therefore it influences both our mental and our physical health. So we take a really broad approach on what sexuality means. And it includes things like how people view themselves and others, how they feel about their body. It's about sort of diversity, consent, developing healthy relationships, and that includes friendships. And this can start really early. So when I say people can start talking about sexuality early, that like really young, they're shocked. But what I mean is that we can put these building blocks in place so that it might start with teaching correct names for genitalia. It might be, asking what makes a good friend, how do you want to be a friend, things like that. So it's really wide encompassing and can be built on over time as the youth gets older. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of where what I'm talking about. I'm not talking just about having sex. I'm talking about everything to do with our body, how we view the world, how we view other people as well. And as I say there, it is a human right that everybody has the opportunity to have to express or engage in healthy sexuality without coercion. And this is really backed up by young people with disabilities really do have the same hopes and fears and desires for sex and relationship as non-disabled peers. But the importance of this is often not entirely recognized by whether it's teachers, parents, healthcare providers. And I'll go on in a little bit to talk about sort of why that might be. But I really want everyone to remember intimate relationships, and I use the word intimate in it, you can use that in a number of ways. But intimate relationships, close relationships are a critical component of mental health. Having a relationship where you can share yourself, be seen, feel seen, etc., is a really fundamental part of mental health. And it starts early, and we need to teach kind of the kids the skills to be able to kind of work towards this. But youth tell us that they really don't get enough information about sexuality first, but also how it's tailored to their disability. So whilst mainstream, let's call it kind of sex ed, would still be useful, what they tell us is that they really wanted to tailor to what their particular disability, like if they have a mobility issue, if they have, whatever issue it is, and obviously this will come up in a minute with spina bifida. So they find it really hard to find resources. And this absence of resources leaves young people with disabilities without the knowledge and confidence to explore their sexuality as they grow older. And that also includes building relationships, having healthy relationships and friendships, being able to provide consent for things, even outside of sex. And so what we often do, though, is we really focus on the risks. So you'll probably see in lots of pieces about sex and disability that youth with disabilities have the highest rate of, sexual abuse and assault, and so on. And that's important, obviously, to prevent. But what we don't often talk about, though, is about the opportunities to have pleasure and desire, and that's as much of a right for them as well. So yes, preventing abuse is, of course, important. I don't think we can stop there. We want to move beyond that to be able to support youth to be able to explore their sexuality in ways that are meaningful for them. I mean, and a PS is, if you give education about sexuality, there is evidence that it prevents or can be preventative of abuse, so it lowers that risk. But I try not to lead with that because I don't think that's the whole story. So this is sort of the background to where we got to with our resources. So what about spina bifida specifically? Well, a few years ago, there was a lot of studies out in the Netherlands asking youth with spina bifida about what they wanted to know about sex, what their questions were, what they did know, didn't know. And you can see that over 2/3 of youth with spina bifida reported, having some concerns about intimate relationships. We did a study a few years ago, and we found that as well, and especially around incontinence, which I'll talk about in a minute. So youth with spina bifida were telling us that they did get some sex education from schools. They got some from parents, some from peers, but really they weren't kind of, they weren't tailored to what their specific questions were. There was a very interesting study a few years ago that talked about, it was called It's Someone Else's Job. And they interviewed, everyone they interviewed were like, oh, no, really important, but oh, no, not my job. I don't have the qualifications for it. So unfortunately, these youth kind of fall through the cracks, right, if no one's addressing it. And then they're sitting there kind of without the information that they need. So the spina bifida specific challenges that we hear from youth and adults. So obviously there's kind of around sensations, around their genital area, if they have, depending on where their lesion is, erection, ejaculation. Incontinence is a really significant one, and it came up a lot in our study a few years ago about concerns and people sort of worrying about, well, what happens if I have an incontinent episode, like during sex, Do I tell my partner in advance? What do I do? How do I address that? And so we know that is a really significant issue. I mean, across the whole spina bifida community generally, but it comes up particularly strongly when we're talking about sexuality. Lack of privacy. I mean, this isn't spina bifida specific, but often disabled youth don't have as much privacy maybe as their non-disabled peers. Often around adults a lot, healthcare providers, maybe parents providing care. There's the stigma, right? They're doubly stigmatized, right, about disability, and then also sex is stigmatized. And so they're really, that can be really sort of challenging. Precocious puberty as well. So we might, this is another argument for me having that conversation as early as possible to start preparing youth. Latex allergy, needs to be taken into consideration. And then a lot of people have, a lot of youth have questions about, can I get pregnant? Can I have kids? Will that kid have a spina bifida? Like what? They have a lot of questions about that, and a lot of fears as well that really don't get discussed. And then they sort of become bigger and bigger, as we know. Like if we have a fear that we can't talk to anyone about, it often kind of grows. And we've certainly found that with youth when we finally talked about it with them, they're like, oh, like it's a relief. So why do healthcare professionals, find it challenging to talk about sexuality? So one of them, it really is a fear of offending the youth and the parents. They're worried if they bring it up that the youth and parents are going to be upset or going to be offended and so on. So, it's easier just then not to tell anybody or talk about it, right? If we're not sure how it's going to be received, whatever the topic, we tend to avoid it. There is an absolute lack of knowledge and training out there in healthcare professionals. It's rarely taught in any of our sort of medical curriculums, whether that's like nurses, physicians. This is not covered in a lot of training. And then there's always also uncertainty about who should initiate the conversations. So, you get the sort of the healthcare professional, or if it was important, they would raise it, and then the child or the parent might think, well, if it was important, the other person would bring it up. So there's really a lot of difficulty about sort of how does this come up? How do I broach it? What will happen when I do? And then a lot of uncertainty about the scope of practice. So, I'm not a physiotherapist, but they might think I'm a physiotherapist. It's not in my scope of practice, and the OT might think the same, and the nurse might think the same, and so on. So there's some sort of ambiguity about like who is the person to have these conversations, and we see that with other difficult to talk about topics as well. Everyone kind of wants to pass it on to the next one, not because they don't think it's important, but they don't feel themselves maybe confident enough or that they've got enough knowledge and training to do it. But again, that means that it's not talked about. That's sort of the end result. And then for parents, I mean, I remember having extremely embarrassing discussion with my mum and dad who tried to get it over with as quickly as possible and threw a book at me. And that was my sex education at home. I get it. It's uncomfortable to talk about, and what to say and when, at what age, like how far do you go, like, at what age. So I totally get that there's a lot of discomfort around this topic, just generally between parents and kids. When a kid has like a disability or something like that, often the child's body is very medicalized, right? And especially if the parents are providing care, including intimate care, it's hard then to sort of switch the lens to them as a sexual being. Right? And healthcare professionals have actually told us the same thing, especially when they've seen the kids since they were really little, that they still see them as that little kid, and they come in and they talk about all the medical stuff. So often there's a lot of medicalization of a child's body and not so much that I think seeing them, it's very hard for people to see them as a sexual being. There's a lot of a real lack of professional guidance, and people really worry if they talk about it and people are offended, that then they're going to get in trouble with their institution. Maybe their institution won't have their back. So a lot of and valid concerns. If this is not talked about within an institution, then I can see why these might be valid fears, right? So there's no sort of agreed upon approach to talking about it. And so that trickles down to parents because then they don't have that guidance and education. And then completely understandably, protectiveness, a fear that your kid's vulnerable, like all of these are completely understandable. The problem is that they then sort of get in the way of, it can make them more vulnerable, and also restrict opportunities for youth to develop, even things like decision making, weighing up risks, agency, confidence, self-esteem. So that unfortunately is the kind of the flip side of keeping them so protected, is that they don't have these opportunities to develop these kind of additional emotions, emotional regulation, and so on. So disabled youth or youth with disabilities face this combination of barriers when it comes to sexuality. So we've got the lack of tailored information, as I was saying, like, what does it actually mean for that child with that particular issue or impairment, or something that's sort of not, that wouldn't fit into mainstream sex ed. The stigma myths about youth with sexuality, we read often, or it's really kind of well accepted that disabled youth are desexualized. They're seen as vulnerable. They're seen as people who often aren't desirable in many ways. There's a sort of societal discussion around this, and that's something we're really trying to address. And then healthcare professionals are unsure how to address it as well, and that extends to parents. So all of this is to say, this is why we made our Let's Talk Disability and Sex online hub. So I'm going to walk you through, or tell you a little bit about some of the different pieces. And there are people on the call that contributed to this. So thank you, Shauna, Hilary, I saw Alexandra, Rega earlier. So we had, everything we do is done with youth, with healthcare providers, and with families. So we have these 6 kind of little buckets, is a technical term. Here we have videos, which are really powerful. People with various disabilities, so as well as educators and parents, talking about like what it's like in the real world around this sort of topic of sexuality and their experiences. And then we've actually just refreshed this. So we now have separate tabs for youth resources, parents resources, and healthcare provider resources. And I'm going to show you a few of those. We have an amazing art exhibit that a few years ago we did a connection day, which was bringing lots of different people from different backgrounds, including youth and families, researchers, educators, healthcare providers, together to kind of really identify what we currently know and where we need to go. And this is actually how the hub came out of it. But as part of that, we had young people who did an art exhibit on what sexuality means to them with whatever disability they had. So there is a link later on. I would encourage you to go and see it because it's really wonderful. And then we have just a place where we can put all our past events, because we've had webinars sort of quarterly for the last few years on all different topics around sexuality and disability. So the hub was designed for youth, parents, as I say, and healthcare providers, because and within those there's a lot of crossover, right? So if you do go into the hub, you'll see some of the same resources in different areas, because they're not necessarily specifically just for one. But some that are this is just a couple of examples of resources for parents. So I should say we did do a massive search, and we actually found more resources than we were expecting, but we got them from so many different places. They were so scattered. So we also brought all of those into our hub. And then where there were gaps, we kind of tried to create some resources to fill those gaps. And I mean, there's many, many more gaps to go, but these are just some of the ones we've done. So for parents, we've got what to say and words to use. And I think today, sort of contemporary language changes so much, and sometimes we might be worried about saying the wrong thing or using the wrong term, and so sometimes that means we sort of avoid it. So we've just given a little bit of a primer here of things to think about, and maybe instead of saying some things, perhaps reframing it and saying it in a different way. This Becoming You book is for preteens, and it's mostly around sort of identity and sexuality and disability, and it has a big glossary at the back with all the terms and definitions, and it's really meant for parents and preteens to read together in an ideal world, so that you're both learning at the same time. It's beautifully illustrated, and we had anyone that knows Corey Silverberg. He writes phenomenal books around sex for kids, and they were part of this as well. It's really great, so I encourage you to go and look it up. For healthcare providers, we have things like sentence starters, like I was saying earlier, like how do I even bring up the notion of that? So we have examples like, growing up can be exciting but scary too. What's the worst thing about puberty and growing up? Things like, we see a lot of things about sex online. Do you have any questions about what you've seen? Things like that is not so direct. And it might even be about talking about peers, like, oh, do any of your peers, in relationships, and what do you think about that? So, judging on who the young person is in front of you, you can sort of adapt it. We have put an example of language that you can use to talk about sort of the limitations of confidentiality, and that will obviously slightly differ depending upon what college you're registered with and so on. But so these are sort of all things to think about that we've put in here. And then we do have some simulations, so videos of people playing actors and playing healthcare providers and youth having these conversations. Some are better and some are not so good. So we have this sort of to walk you through considerations. So that's for our healthcare professionals. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about some youth resources that we made. So this is just an example of one person. So in our we have youth advisory groups. We have for this sort of big project around resources. We have junior group, which was 12 to 17. That had three members, and then we had a senior group because we felt 12 and 30-year-olds probably aren't talking about the same thing. And both brief was really like, what's important to you? What do you want to do? What do you want to create? And so I'm going to talk about the junior group today. And again, I think Alexandra Rego is on the call, and she was very much part of this. And these are our three junior groups. So we have Emily there, Gavi in the middle, and Cameron on the left. And really our approach to youth engagement is around partnering with them, not just sort of telling them what we want to do and getting them to do it. It's about treating them with equality in order to have that trust with them. Time, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Like things can take a long time, and it's tempting just to rush past it to get things done, but it's so important to allow for that. And then this knowledge exchange, they have opinions, they live it every day, right? We want to know from them what's important to them, and we can support them, and we can contribute as well to the conversation. So our junior group decided they wanted to make some videos, and we said, okay, videos about what? And all three of them had different ideas, so we ended up making 3 videos. But they wanted it for youth. They were like, we want to create them for other youth. So they each picked a topic, after brainstorming. They again very strong opinions, and they had that each of the three had a passion for particular topics that they wanted to talk about. So there's a lot of brainstorming. And then the research coordinator on the project, Emily, who just created these phenomenal things with no background whatsoever, but she met with each of them separately to talk about their character. So, you know, what do you want the character to look like? And so they created them exactly how they wanted. Cameron, I don't know if we have a picture of it, or maybe. So maybe he has a Mrs. Claus Santa skirt on, and Emily was like, "Oh, okay, you know, anything else you want to wear?" And he goes, "No, that's what he wanted to wear, so that's what his character wore." Which, you know, so we really wanted to give them the kind of confidence and the agency to do what they wanted. So they created their character to look exactly how they wanted it to. And then sort of and the kind of almost like the storyline. What is it that they want to convey? So then Emily went off and used this software called Beyond, which looked super complicated to me, but she made these incredible videos using it. And then it was just multiple rounds of feedback. So going back to them, what do you think? Is this representing what what you meant? So that's what I mean around time. That takes a lot of time. Keep going back and cycling back. So we Emily did all the sort of the technical piece, and they were just informing it, so that we weren't asking them or burdening them too much. We weren't telling them to go away and make a video. It was like, you tell us, and then make sure it's you're really happy with it. And we kind of felt that was a good balance between giving them choice and like they can guide the process, but we're not overburdening them by giving them all these tasks, which I think is really important when people are, you know, participating in these kind of projects. So these are the videos that came out. So Cameron was talking about how you talk to someone you like at school. Gavi is really passionate about inclusion in school. She has a speech difference, and that can sometimes make her excluded. So she was talking about that. And then Emily really wanted to talk about how you go to a healthcare. Emily was a little older, and she wanted to talk about going to a healthcare professional to talk about sort of sexuality, relationships, and so on. And then with each video, we made an accompanying resource. So disability and dating, this is the one that went with Cameron's resource. So it had things like where to meet new people, online dating, but also like, you know, areas to be careful, and just sort of to give some sort of safety pointers as well as other considerations. Friendship and communication was one that went with Gavi's videos. So we have here around different ways of communicating, boundaries and so on. So each came with its own sort of handout. So just to sum up, sexuality is a human right. It is not an option just to not address it with disabled youth. Obviously, you have to do it in an appropriate way for them and where they're at, but we have to address it with them. We get it. Parents, healthcare providers, teachers are unsure how to approach the topic, and there is a lack of tailored resources for youth. However, through our process, we were able to co-create resources that have been so well received. We've been on the news with them. The young people were on the news with them, talking about them. They've had tons of downloads, and hopefully really shows the importance of doing it in collaboration with the people who these resources are for and about, in order to make them, you know, real world and really useful. So you can check out the hub today if just by if you use your camera and put it up and get this QR code, it will take you straight to the hub. I encourage you to go and check it out, take a little look around, and you can always tell us, there's a feedback thing on it, you can always tell us what I think, but that is where everything is housed there. So tons more I could say, but for now I'll leave it there, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Amy, for sharing this important project that you've been working on. I think it's been a 3-year project now.
Yes, it has. Yeah. And we've had other aspects of it as well.
Yes.
So we've been doing the webinars, we've been doing what else have we been doing, Shauna? I can't remember. But we've been doing lots of different things. This has just been one part of it.
Knowledge translation, working with the Youth Council.
Yeah,
So Hydrocephalus Canada has been involved in this project.
yeah.
And it's just been amazing to see all of the resources that are out there that we didn't know about. So please, I would recommend checking out the hub. It's done very well for parents, for healthcare professionals, and most importantly, for the youth. If you have any suggestions, please let us know because we're always
Hmm.
interested in hearing from those who are actually using the materials. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but maybe I'll just ask one in general. How did you come to the conclusion that this resource was required?
It, it really came out of the connection day that we had. So this was a few years ago. It was just, with the pandemic, it was meant to be an in-person sort of conference type meeting day. Then the pandemic came along, so we had it online. But we really wanted just to hear from people like, what do we know and what do we not know, and what are we going to do about it, and how can we prioritize it? We can't do everything, but we wanted to try and to prioritize what was going on. And people were saying, we need resources. And then other people were like, oh, but I've got this resource on that. And we were like, well, that's not much help if it's on your hard drive on your work computer. So it was kind of this idea. The first idea was gathering, curating, bringing it all into just one place, given the opportunity we had through the connection day to really get the ones that people are using day to day and any they've heard of. And then we did a big search. So really that was sort of the start of it. It was just an idea to put everything in one place. And then it kind of took off from there.
Yeah. And how many organizations and agencies were involved? I recall at least
Oh,
20
now
or
you're
more.
asked. I think we had nine or 10 organizations across Canada, and I think 9 or 10 researchers on this particular project. So we had obviously Hydrocephalus Canada, we had now we can test my memory. We
I
had a couple of
can.
like Planned Parenthood. We had an organisation that works in Nunavut with Indigenous youth, disabled youth. We had CCAN, so the kind of Canada-wide sex education information organisation. We had a lot. So we wanted to combine some sort of sexual health organizations that said, we're not sure how to work with disabled youth. And then disability organizations that says, we're not sure how to talk about disability. And the idea was bringing them all together to kind of build that knowledge together and share knowledge, this was very much a knowledge mobilization project.
And by having this hub on the website, have you seen a lot of action on the site? Are people using it?
Yeah, yeah, we have actually. So Public Health Ontario, no, Toronto Public Health, their school nurses now use it wherever they go into schools. That they contacted us and were like, this is awesome. And we've had other people that have contacted us through it. So it's getting quite a lot of attention. And as I say, we've done sort of some media pieces on it. A lot of media are really interested in it. So yeah,
Yes, I
and it's
believe I've
evolved
seen.
over time, right? It's like we have just refreshed it because it was time. So we grow and evolve it over time, and so we're always open to suggestions, thoughts, things that people think they would like. We'd love to put some stuff on there about parenting. And sort of more of the older age, sort of thinking about reproduction and parenting in collaboration with the amazing Sunnybrook Clinic that works with disabled women. Hilary, talking next, may well
Yes,
mention that. So there's your segue into our next
absolutely.
presentation.
Yes. Well, thanks so much, Amy. As always, your presentations are always full of interesting information and entertaining.